The youngest boy was still holding the dead woman's hand when the county wagon stopped in front of the courthouse. He did not cry. That was the part that made Mara Bell step down from the saddle. The other 4 children stood behind him in a crooked line, each clutching something that had belonged to the woman on the floorboards. A little girl held a tin cup. A red-haired boy held a brass key. The tallest girl had wrapped herself in a gray shawl. And the baby, asleep against the shoulder of a child who could not have been more than 13, had one bare foot showing beneath a torn blanket. Before noon, Bellwether had gathered as if judgment were underway. Men stood outside the mercantile. Women watched from the boardwalk. The blacksmith left his forge open. The clerk rubbed his neck. 5 children. No kin found. Mother dead. Father gone 3 years. The youngest boy finally looked up. He was perhaps 7. His face had the pale, careful stillness of someone who had learned that tears used water a body might need later. The clerk opened a folded paper. There are beds at the Carson place and the Haskells. A family in Abilene has offered for 1 girl. The infant can go to the sisters in Wichita. The red-haired boy stepped forward. We don't split. The clerk looked toward the crowd, already tired of being made to feel cruel. Son, nobody asked you to decide. The 13-year-old girl tightened her arm around the baby. Then ask us something else. Mara had come into town for flour and lamp oil, planning to be gone before supper. Instead, she walked toward the wagon. If you're listening tonight from a kitchen, a porch, a quiet bedroom, or a road far from Bellwether, tell me where you are. There is room for you beside this fire, and before this story is over, you will understand why a town that thought it was choosing 5 children's futures ended up being judged by them. Mara stopped beside the youngest boy. The dead woman's hand had slipped through the wagon slat and hung inches above the mud. Mara lifted it gently and placed it beneath the blanket. The boy watched her do it. Are you here to pick? He asked. No. Then what are you here for? Mara glanced at the baby, then at the girl holding him, to see what was missed. The clerk frowned. Miss Bell, this is county business. It's a dead woman in a wagon, Mara said. That makes it everybody's business for 1 minute. She climbed onto the wagon tongue. The boards smelled of wet wool, old blood, and the sharp medicinal sweetness of crushed yarrow. The mother's lips were blue. Mara pressed 2 fingers beneath the jaw, though she knew there would be no pulse. Then she saw the child's tin cup. It was dented at the rim. The bottom was black with soot. On the side, someone had scratched a narrow line into the metal, then another beneath it, marking water levels. The marks were too regular to be a child's game. Mara turned the cup over. A dry crust of mud clung to the base. Where did she fall? Mara asked. The oldest girl pointed toward the road west. By the creek. Why bring her here? She told us to. The answer was so plain that it took Mara a moment to understand it. The girl's name was Ruth. The red-haired boy was Amos. The little girl was June. The youngest was Eli. The baby had no name anyone would say aloud because the mother had promised to name her when they reached safety. Safety from what? Mara asked. Ruth looked toward the courthouse windows. Mr. Vale. At that name, several people on the boardwalk shifted. Elias Vale owned the feed store, the bank, 2 freight wagons, and the only bridge across Bellwether Creek. He had come 12 years earlier with a mule team and a forgotten loan. Conversations lowered when he entered. The clerk folded the paper. Mr. Vale has offered to pay for the children's placement. Ruth's eyes hardened. He wants the land. The crowd quieted. Mara looked at the cup, the mother's blue lips, and the children arranged around the body like fence posts holding up a gate. The clerk's paper made no mention of the 6 acres along the creek, where Vale had ordered them out by sundown. The easy thing would have been to turn away. Mara had no husband, no children, and no money to feed 5 mouths. She had spent 4 years learning to mend harness in the dark, read a horse's breathing, and leave before affection became a debt. But when she stepped down from the wagon, Eli caught the hem of her coat. Please, he whispered. We can be good. Mara looked at his fingers. They were gray with road dust, and 1 nail had been cut too close. That isn't what I'm worried about, she said. Across the street, the green shutters of Elias Vale's office opened. A man stood behind them, watching. Mara took the $3 from her pocket, gave 2 to the clerk for flour and medicine, and kept 1 for the road. Then Ruth asked, Will you take one of us? Mara closed her hand around the coin. No, she said. I'll take all 5. The town did not gasp. It made the small sound people make when a foolish thing has been spoken aloud. By sundown, the laughter had stopped. Mara's ranch was a wind-bent house 2 miles north of Bellwether, a barn with half a roof, an iron-tasting well, and 30 acres divided from the neighboring range by a fence that leaned. She called it St. Mercy because the land had been sold as a blessing and behaved like a punishment. Ruth carried the baby, Amos the key, June the cup. Eli carried nothing, which made Mara watch him. "Where's your bed?" Amos asked. "Inside." "How many?" "One." He looked at Ruth. Ruth looked at the house. June looked at the barn. "We can sleep in the barn," Amos said. "You can sleep inside." "Where will you sleep?" "Somewhere that doesn't snore." Eli smiled, then hid it. The clerk climbed into his wagon. "You have 30 days. If Vale's claim is proven, the children go where the court sends them." "His claim to what?" "Their mother's land. She had a deed, far as I know." "Then why isn't it in the file?" "Vale says it was never recorded." The wagon rolled away, leaving the 5 children listening to the wheels fade. That evening Mara cooked beans and divided the last strip of salt pork into 6 pieces. Ruth tried to give hers to the baby. Mara pushed it back. "Eat." She needs milk. You need food. Both things can be true." They ate in silence until the baby fussed and Amos reached for the knife beside his plate. Mara covered his hand. "No knives at the table." "I wasn't." "I know." Outside, a horse stamped in the barn. Mara heard the uneven scrape of one hind hoof and rose before anyone else noticed. "Sit," she said. She went out into the dark. The horse was a bay mare with a rope burn under her jaw, tied to a post by a halter too tight. Mara loosened it, ran her fingers along the mare's neck, and waited until the animal's trembling eased. Then she found the swollen hoof, lifted it, and drew out a nail buried near the frog. When she returned, Amos was standing in the doorway. "How do you know?" he asked. "Because she told me. Horses don't talk. Neither do boys who are scared." "I'm not scared." "No, you're busy." She put the nail on the shelf beside the lamp. By morning, Bellwether had decided Mara Bell was either a saint, a fool, or a woman with something to hide. St. Mercy received visitors all day. Mrs. Pruitt with a burned loaf, a Haskell girl checking the baby for lice, and Deputy Calder with a court notice. And Elias Vale came last. He wore a black coat without dust on the hem. His silver watch chain crossed his vest. He stood beneath the porch roof and smiled as if he had never been refused anything in his life. "You have taken temporary custody," he said. "I have." Temporary is a useful word. It reminds us not to mistake charity for ownership. Mara leaned against the doorframe. "I don't own them." "Then you understand why they cannot remain here." Behind her, Ruth stopped sweeping. The bristles went still against the floor. Vale continued. "The mother owed me money. The acreage secured the debt. Since the children are minors, the land must be placed under responsible management. Yours, I suppose." "Mine already, in everything but ink." He said it gently, which made it dangerous. Mara took the court notice from Deputy Calder and opened it. The paper stated that a hearing would be held in 14 days. Until then, the children were to remain under county supervision. It also stated that Mr. Vale had offered suitable domestic arrangements for 2 children at the Carson farm and the remaining 3 through distant placements. She looked up. "You want them separated before the hearing." "I want them fed." "Then why does your offer depend on taking their land?" For the first time, something cold moved beneath his smile. "Land is not a child's toy, Miss Bell. It belongs with a man who can make it productive." Mara folded the notice. It belonged to their mother. She was not productive. A cup broke inside the house. Vale's gaze traveled past Mara. Ruth stood among the shards, one hand bleeding. The baby began to cry. Mara stepped outside and closed the door behind her. "You'll leave by noon," Vale said. "No. You have a broken barn and a dry well. I have a sound roof over the kitchen. You have no legal claim to those children. Neither do you." Vale's eyes rested on the single coin hanging from a nail beside the door, the one Mara had kept after spending the others. "You know what happens to people who carry a load beyond their strength?" "Yes. They break." "Sometimes," Mara said, "the load is what teaches them where their strength is." He left without raising his voice. Inside, Ruth had wrapped a cloth around her hand. Mara cleaned the cut while Ruth washed her face. "You shouldn't have said that to him." "I've said worse." "Did it help?" "No." "Then why say it?" because he was counting on nobody answering. That night, the children told her about the cabin by the creek. Their mother, Lydia, grew corn and kept bees in boxes made from freight crates. Their father had gone looking for work in Colorado and sent 2 letters, then none. When Lydia became sick, Vale sent a man with a paper claiming the land had secured a loan. What loan? Mara asked. Medicine, Ruth said. He said she signed. Did she? Ruth held the gray shawl close to her throat. She said a person can sign anything when her child is burning with fever. The room went quiet. Mara knew that silence. At 17, she had signed a paper taking blame for a missing payroll box so her father could keep his job. The box was later found in the foreman's room, but her father never apologized. Since then, whenever a man placed paper before her, she read it 3 times and trusted him never. At dawn she rode to the creek with Ruth and Amos. The others stayed with Mrs. Pruitt. The cabin stood behind cottonwoods. One wall had been pried open, the hives smashed, corn flattened in the mud though the morning was clear. Mara crouched beside the fence. The posts had been cut clean through at the same height. Not broken. Cut. Amos pointed to the ground. They came at night. Ruth was staring at the door. Mara opened it. The room smelled of ashes and fever. A bedroll lay in one corner. On the wall, above a shelf, someone had scratched 5 small marks into the plaster. Beneath them was a 6th, unfinished. Ruth touched the unfinished mark. She was going to write the baby's name, she said. Mara felt the old pull beneath her ribs whenever a person was interrupted before reaching the end of something. Under the bed, she found an oilcloth-wrapped biscuit tin containing a brass key, a doctor's receipt, and numbers in Lydia's cramped hand. Amos leaned close. What are they? Maybe a ledger. Can it stop Vale? Not by itself. Ruth looked at the broken hives. What can? Mara folded the paper. Proof that can survive a man's denial. On the ride home, they passed Vale's bridge. A wagon stood across it, blocking the way. Vale sat on the driver's bench. You found the cabin, he said. Mara drew rein. It wasn't hard. Nothing is hard when somebody else has paid the price. Ruth's hand closed around the baby's blanket. Vale lifted a sealed envelope. The court can be persuaded that these children need immediate placement. You can make this simple. Choose 2 to keep. Let the county arrange the others. I will make certain the 2 have food and schooling. Choose 2. He had made it sound like mercy. Mara looked at the 5 children. Amos stood between June and the wagon. Ruth was pale but proud. Eli held the cup. The baby slept against her shoulder. Then Mara looked at the bridge. Vale controlled the crossing, the bank, the feed store, and half the jurors who would hear the case. He could make the children hungry by sundown. He could make Mara's own creditors impatient. He could turn every neighbor into a witness against her. The right choice would cost shelter, money, and perhaps the children themselves. What happens if I refuse? She asked. Vale smiled. You discover how quickly good intentions become evidence of incompetence. The bridge boards creaked. Mara could take Ruth and the baby, pretend the others would be safe, and call the loss necessary. Ruth watched her as if she had already heard the question inside the question. Mara handed the sealed envelope back across the space between them. I'm not choosing 2. Vale's smile disappeared. Behind Mara, Eli spoke for the first time. We're 5. Not for long, Vale said. The wagon moved aside. Mara crossed with the children, feeling his eyes until the cottonwoods hid them. That night the south wind worried every loose board. Mara studied Lydia's dates, weights, and initials. At the bottom, upside down, were 3 words, hive under stone. She took a lantern to the creek. Ruth followed. You should be in bed. So should you. Mara nearly smiled. You follow strangers into dark places? Only the ones who say they're taking all of us. They found a flat slab half buried in mud. Beneath it lay a narrow wooden box. Inside were 6 folded papers, a small silver thimble, and a letter bearing a postmark from Denver. Ruth took the letter but did not open it. What is it? Mara asked. Father's. Do you want me to read it? No. Then why keep it? Because if I open it, he can't still be coming back. The sentence entered Mara like cold water. She sat beside Ruth on the stone. The creek whispered over the rocks. Then Mara said, a letter can be true even when the person who wrote it failed. Ruth turned the envelope over. You know that. I know that a person can love you and still leave you with the worst part of their promise. Ruth's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away. Did someone leave you? My father. Is he dead? I don't know. That's worse. Yes. Ruth pressed the letter against her knee. I hate him. You're allowed. I miss him. You're allowed that too. Ruth's breath shook. Those two things don't fit together. They don't have to fit tonight. At the edge of the lantern light, a twig snapped. Mara rose. She placed Ruth behind her and drew the short rifle from the strap across her saddle. A shadow moved between the trees. Who's there? No answer. Then a stone struck the lantern. The flame went out. Mara heard Ruth gasp, heard the baby cry from the direction of the house, where she had thought June was sleeping. Heard horses break into a run. Stay down, Mara said. A shot cracked from the trees. The bullet struck the stone beside her hand. Mara fired toward the muzzle flash, not to hit, but to make the shooter move. Branches snapped. Someone cursed. She seized Ruth by the wrist and pulled her toward the creek bed. They ran bent low. Another shot tore through the cottonwood above them. At the house, Amos was shouting. June screamed once, then stopped. Mara reached the yard and saw two riders dragging the children toward a wagon. Vale's men had come through the back door. One held the baby. The other had Amos by the collar. Mara ran for the barn. The bay mare still favored the left hoof. Mara cut the lead rope and slapped her flank. The animal bolted through the half door, sending one man backward beneath the wagon wheel. Amos dropped free. Ruth lunged for the baby. The man holding the infant lifted his arm. Mara reached him first. She caught his wrist and twisted until the baby fell against her shoulder. The man swung with his other hand. Mara ducked. His fist struck the barn post. She drove her elbow into his ribs and shoved him into the dirt. The second rider drew a pistol. Mara turned, baby tucked beneath one arm, rifle in the other hand. The man stopped. For one breath, nobody moved. The baby's cry trembled against Mara's neck. Then a lantern flared at the edge of the yard. Elias Vale stood there with Deputy Calder and 6 men from town. His face was calm. Put down the rifle, he said. Mara stared at the pistol pointed toward Ruth. Tell your man to put down his weapon. Your property has been damaged. My hired hands have been assaulted. You have taken children who are not yours. Put down the rifle. Your men cross my door at night. Prove it. Behind Vale, the townsmen watched, ashamed or afraid, none ready to stand between a bank and its debtors. The wounded man groaned. The baby cried harder. Mara could shoot the rider. She knew exactly where the bullet would enter. She knew how much pressure the trigger required. She also knew that the instant she fired, Vale would own the story forever. He was not asking her to surrender a rifle. He was asking her to become the woman he had already described. Mara lowered the barrel by 1 inch. Ruth, she said, take the baby. Ruth stepped forward. The rider's pistol shifted toward her. Mara raised the rifle again. Vale's voice remained soft. You see? This is why children need proper guardians. Amos picked up the brass key from the ground and threw it at the lantern. Glass burst. Darkness swallowed the yard. Mara heard 3 things. Ruth running, the rider cursing, and the bay mare kicking the wagon axle apart. She fired once into the dirt beside the pistol man's boots. He fell backward. Deputy Calder shouted. Men collided. Someone screamed that the barn was burning, though no fire had yet caught. Mara grabbed Amos and June. Ruth emerged with the baby. Together they ran through the side gate and down the dry creek bed. Behind them, Vale shouted her name as the children's feet struck stones. June stumbled. Mara lifted her without slowing. At the bend, they crouched beneath an overhanging bank. Are they coming? Amos whispered. Yes. How many? Enough. Ruth held up the envelope from Denver. The papers are in here. Mara looked at it. What papers? Mother said the letter would tell us where Father hid the deed. The words felt like another door burning. Mara heard horses above the bank. Vale called down. Miss Bell, this can still end cleanly. Give me the children, and I will see you are paid for your trouble. Mara looked at the 5 faces pressed close in the dark. Ruth with blood on her palm. Amos shaking so hard his teeth clicked. June buried in her coat. Eli clutching the cup, and the baby making a frightened sound. Vale called again. Choose 2. The rest can be placed safely. Mara took the Denver letter from Ruth. We're going to read it. Above them, a match flared. The dry grass caught. Fire ran along the bank in a thin orange line. Mara pushed the children toward the creek. Go. There's nowhere to go, Amos said. She looked upstream. The old irrigation tunnel began beneath a shelf of limestone. narrow as a coffin and half filled with silt. Mara had used it once to reach the north pasture when floodwater cut off the road. She had never taken children through it. Now there is. Smoke thickened. Heat pressed down. Ruth went first with the baby. June crawled after her. Amos pulled Eli by the arm. Mara entered last, dragging a fallen plank behind them to hide the opening. The tunnel smelled of wet stone and roots. The children crawled on hands and knees while Mara kept one hand against June's back. Behind them, boots slid down the bank. A man shouted. They went into the cut. Another voice answered, block the far end. Mara felt the truth settle into place. Vale had planned for every public road. He had not planned for a woman who knew how water moved beneath the ground. The tunnel narrowed. Ruth's dress caught on a root. The baby began to wail. Keep moving, Mara said. I can't, Ruth whispered. You can. My hand. Use the other. Ruth pulled free. The root tore her sleeve. Ahead, a pale square appeared. The far opening. Mara reached it and found the creek beyond swollen from an upstream release. The water rolled brown and fast. On the opposite bank stood a line of men with lanterns. Vale had blocked both ends. Mara turned back. Behind them, firelight pulsed through the tunnel mouth. Smoke dragged low across the ceiling. There was no road left. Ruth looked at her. What do we do? Mara opened the Denver letter with her thumb. The paper inside was damp, the handwriting faded. She read the first lines by the light of the fire behind them. Lydia, if you receive this, I did not leave because I stopped loving you. I left because Vale's men followed me to the freight camp. The deed is not in the cabin. It is where you taught Ruth to count bees, beneath the third box from the west wall. Mara looked at Ruth. The deed, she said. It was in the hives. Ruth shook her head. They smashed them. Not all of them. The letter continued. I owe you the truth. The loan was paid in full. Vale knows it. He has been waiting for the children to grow old enough to forget. The fire reached the tunnel entrance. Mara folded the letter and put it inside her coat. Can we swim? Amos asked. Not with the baby. The river thundered below the far opening. The men outside raised their lanterns. Mara looked at the limestone ceiling. Then she looked at the old iron pipe running along the wall, the one that fed water from the creek to the abandoned mill. Its support brackets had been rusting for years. A load carried too long, she thought, did not always break at the weakest point. Sometimes it broke where someone finally understood how it was held. She took the brass key from Amos. What's that for? Maybe the mill. The key fit the lock on a small iron gate beside the pipe. Mara had never seen the gate open. It gave with a groan. Water burst through the pipe. The pressure struck the far bank beneath the men's feet. Mud collapsed. 2 lanterns vanished. Horses screamed and reared. Mara shoved the children through the opening and into the reeds. They landed in freezing water up to their knees. Ruth held the baby above her head. Amos and June clung to one another. Eli dropped the tin cup. Mara caught it before the current carried it away. Across the river, Vale stood alone on the bank, coat black against the flames. He had lost the bridge, the men, and the certainty in his own face. But he still had the court, the bank, and the town. The next morning, Bellwether woke to find the bridge broken, the north road flooded, and Mara Bell gone with 5 children into the hills. For 3 days they sheltered in an abandoned schoolhouse. Mrs. Pruitt brought bread, and Calder left a blanket. People began asking why Vale had sent men to a widow's cabin before a hearing. Mara tended Ruth's hand, splinted June's ankle, and taught Amos to check a horse for heat. Work kept old memories from becoming present ones. On the 4th morning, Ruth found her sitting outside with Lydia's papers spread across her knees. You could leave, Ruth said. Mara did not look up. So could you. We have nowhere. Neither do I. Ruth sat beside her. The schoolhouse steps were rough beneath their legs. Below, the creek shone in the first clear light since the fire. Mara had found the deed the night before, inside the 3rd hive box from the west wall. The box had been shattered, but the deed was sealed in waxed cloth and wedged beneath the false bottom. Lydia's initials matched the county record book. The loan had been paid 18 months before her death. Vale had kept the original receipt and filed no satisfaction of debt. The evidence was strong, but not enough. Vale could call the deed forged. He could question Mara's custody. He could say the children had been coached. He could make the town choose between truth and the money he had lent it. Ruth touched the silver thimble found in the box. Mother used this when she mended our clothes. Mara handed it to her. Ruth shook her head. Keep it. It's yours. You found it. Finding isn't owning. Ruth turned the thimble in her fingers. Why did you take us? Mara could have answered with the truth about the wagon, the cup, the unfinished mark on the wall. Instead, she said, because you asked. People ask for things all the time. I know. And you don't give them. No. Why us? Mara looked at the 3 children sleeping inside and at Amos standing guard by the door with a broom handle. Because you were trying to keep one another alive before anybody came to help. Ruth lowered her gaze. Mother said I was too hard. She was wrong. She said I was becoming like father. Mara folded the deed. Being afraid of becoming someone isn't the same as becoming them. Ruth's mouth tightened. I don't know how to stop being afraid. Neither do I. The admission surprised them both. Mara reached for the thimble, then stopped. She could have kept it. She had found it, protected it, carried it through fire and water. No one in town would have blamed her. Instead, she placed the thimble in Ruth's palm and closed the girl's fingers around it. From the schoolhouse doorway, Deputy Calder saw her do it. He looked away before either of them could catch him watching. That afternoon, Mara rode back toward Bellwether alone. She left the children with Mrs. Pruitt and took the deed, the letter, the receipt, and Lydia's little ledger. She also took the tin cup, though she did not know why. Vale was waiting in the bank. He had a cut across his cheek and mud on his boots. The broken bridge had made him less polished, but not less dangerous. You have caused considerable loss, he said. To whom? To this town. The bridge was yours. The bridge served everyone. So did the children's land. His eyes moved to the papers in her hand. You think ink makes you safe? No. People do. People are hungry. Then stop holding their debts over their heads. He leaned against the counter. You have no idea what it takes to build something in a place like this. I lent money when no one else would. I kept stores open through drought. I paid for that bridge while men with clean hands watched their neighbors drown. Mara believed him. That was the worst of it. He had done useful things. He had saved the town enough times that people mistook his usefulness for goodness. You built a town that cannot breathe without you, she said. I built one that survives. No, you built one that is afraid to try. He smiled faintly. And what will you build? Mara set the tin cup on the counter. A place where a child's hunger isn't a contract. He looked at the cup. You cannot feed 5 children on principles. No, but I can feed them on work. He laughed once. The land is worthless. Then why did you fight so hard to own it? The question stayed in the bank after she left. The hearing took place 2 days later in the courthouse beneath the broken bell rope. Every seat was filled. Ruth wore the gray shawl. June rested her ankle on a stool, and Eli held the cup. Vale's attorney spoke first. He called the deed suspicious, the letter unreliable, and Mara Bell unfit. He described the fire as an act of reckless violence and the children as frightened witnesses under her influence. Mara sat still. When her turn came, she called no grand witness. She called the county recorder, a thin woman named Ada Moss who clicked her tongue whenever she read difficult handwriting. Ada produced the old index book. Lydia's deed had been presented for recording but rejected because the filing fee was short by 12 cents. The rejection stamp was there. So was the date. Then Mara produced Lydia's receipt from Vale's office, signed by Vale himself. The room stirred. Vale's attorney claimed the receipt covered a different debt. Ada Moss clicked her tongue again and pointed to the account number. It matched the deed's legal description. Mara called no one else until she placed the little ledger on the table. The numbers showed payments Lydia had made in honey, corn, and labor. Every entry bore Vale's initials. The total exceeded the original loan by $11.40. Vale looked at the ledger as if seeing a dead woman's hand reach through the pages. Then Ruth stood. The judge asked if she understood that she did not have to speak. I understand, Ruth said. Her voice shook once. Then it steadied. She told the court about the men who came to the cabin, about the broken hives, about her mother saying the deed was paid, about the night at St. Mercy. She did not exaggerate. She did not weep for effect. When Vale's attorney asked whether Mara had told her what to say, Ruth answered, no. She told me to tell what happened, even if it made us look bad. Mara's hand tightened beneath the table. Ruth continued, Mrs. Bell could have chosen too. She didn't. The judge looked toward Vale. Did you make such an offer? Vale did not answer. The silence was answer enough. Deputy Calder testified next. He described arriving at St. Mercy after the fire had begun. He described Vale's men, the wagon, and the pistol. His voice was low. He kept removing his hat and putting it back on. Vale's attorney objected. The judge overruled him. At last the judge examined the receipt, the deed, and the ledger. He ruled the land belonged to Lydia's estate, that the debt had been satisfied, and that the 5 children were to remain together under Mara Bell's guardianship until such time as they chose otherwise. The judge added that the county would investigate the attempted removal and the burned road. Vale was required to repair the bridge or surrender the crossing easement. It was not ruin. He kept his bank, store, and house above the green shutters. But the town had heard truth in a room where he could not purchase silence. When the people rose, nobody moved toward him. Outside, the sky was clear and bright. The courthouse steps were warm beneath the children's shoes. Amos looked at the broken bell rope through the window. "Will they ring it again?" he asked. "Probably," Mara said. "Will it sound different?" "Only if the town listens." Mrs. Haskell approached with potatoes, unable to meet Ruth's eyes. "I was afraid," she said. "So were we," Ruth answered. "I should have come sooner." "Yes." The woman accepted it and walked away. The blacksmith followed with nails. Deputy Calder brought a new lock. Ada Moss placed 12 cents in Mara's palm. "For the filing fee. The deed is recorded now." Ada clicked her tongue. "Then call it interest." By autumn, the land along Bellwether Creek had changed. The children rebuilt the hives from salvaged boards. Ruth learned to keep the ledger, though she left a blank line after every week, saying a person ought to leave room for something unexpected. Amos repaired the fence and taught the bay mare to stand for a farrier. June planted beans in a row so straight that Mara suspected the girl had inherited Lydia's patience. Eli carried water with both hands and slept without waking at every hoofbeat. The baby was named Mercy, not because the world had shown much of it, but because Ruth said they ought to remember how much they had made for one another. Mara still slept lightly. She still read every paper 3 times. When a stranger stood too long at the porch, her fingers found the old scar near her thumb. But she no longer kept her coat packed for the road. Elias Vale repaired the bridge before winter. He did it without asking thanks. His bank remained open, but people compared his figures with Ada Moss's records. A year later, the county established a public lending office. Vale's power did not vanish in a day. It simply stopped being the only thing people could see. One frosty evening, Mara found Ruth beside the empty hives with her father's letter. "You opened it," Mara said. "Not all the way." "Why not?" Ruth touched the torn edge. "I learned I can love what was true without waiting for what wasn't." Mara sat beside her. Across the yard, Amos was showing June how to lift a gate without pinching her fingers. Mercy slept in a basket near the kitchen door. Eli was humming to himself over the water pump. Ruth leaned her shoulder against Mara's. "I thought being strong meant nobody could take anything from me," she said. Mara watched the children moving in the amber light. "It helps to know what you can give." Ruth breathed out. "I'm afraid I'll lose them." "So am I." "What do we do with that?" Mara took the thimble from the pocket of her dress and set it on Ruth's knee. "We keep building while we have them." Ruth closed her fingers around it. Weeks became months. On the first warm morning of spring, Mercy took her first steps toward the open door. Ruth caught her laughing while bees hummed in the rebuilt boxes and children's boots thudded across the porch. St. Mercy was still small and stubborn, but no longer short of people who had decided to stay. Mara stood at the fence with one hand resting on the weathered post. Ruth came beside her, holding the little silver thimble on a cord around her neck. "Mother left us a home," Ruth said. Mara looked toward the house, where 5 shadows moved behind the curtains and a 6th, smaller shadow danced between them. "No," she said. "She left you the chance to make one." The sun lowered behind the cottonwoods, laying a long gold road across the creek, while the children carried lanterns from the porch, and St. Mercy glowed warm against the gathering dark. "Next time, we'll follow a widow who buys an abandoned schoolhouse for $1 and finds a name carved beneath the floorboards. One that the whole county has spent 20 years trying to forget. Until then, keep a light on for the overlooked, and we'll meet again when the road brings us together."